Okay, good evening, everybody. Apologies, I am late. I was just, dealing with kids and all of that stuff. Hope everyone is okay. Hope everyone is well. Enjoying your Tuesday. Struggling to get my words out brilliantly. It's been hotter than the sun in the UK last couple of days. That being said, we actually have quite a bit to discuss tonight. So I'm just going to jump straight in, I think, rather than give a little introduction. So here we are. Standard charts that we're used to seeing at the moment. 3-day time frame on Bitcoin. We did actually, back end of last week, close above that 106 level. But as you can see today, and it has been today's price action, we're moving back down. We're back at 105,700 just about at the moment. I've got to wait for this one to close. Still a day and a half left of it, really. But we can't hold that level. You know where I'm thinking we're going to go. We're going to go to that 102 level that we've been to so many times before. And I'm going to show you later on why I think that's probably a more optimal location for it, just with a descending channel that I've drawn plenty of times before. Market dominance, Bitcoin knows no chill, and it is still hoovering up the vast majority of the crypto market. Very little interest continuing in altcoins, and that's going to be something we're going to touch on a little bit later on with sort of the whole theme, in inverted commas, of this call tonight. But yep, 65.5% effectively, and yeah, still trending upwards. Now, I know we've drawn compressions in the past, and we are pretty close to the apex of that compression. But for me, I don't really see that playing out. Not just because of the state of altcoins, but just where the narrative and the focus is with cryptocurrency. A couple of the first news articles you're going to see me talk about, it's all still about Bitcoin, and with that lacking drive for retail, I'm not really sure where that's going to create this breakdown, major breakdown as well, of Bitcoin dominance. Total 2, everything except for Bitcoin, still looking pretty shambolic. I mean, that's probably a bit tough. But that 110 level that we've talked about in the past, trillion that is, we're heading smack back down into it. Now, it has held previously, so there is a chance maybe that we see some sort of relief bounce from there. But as you can see on the 3-day time frame, and we'll look in detail again later, it is just lower high after lower high. Not quite lower. Well, it is lower low if you include this wick down here. We don't really want it to be wicking down there to create a new lower low, because we're sub 1 trillion then, and that's going to take a beating on the altcoins. And then our beloved Tau. And we kind of talked about Tau on Friday quite a bit with potential setups and trades, and it kind of played out how we thought it was going to go. We had that opportunity to get back in around about 320 where we are at the moment. That moved back up to 350, and then what we've seen, it's just come back down over the last 9 days. I mean, even last 12 days, really, because we actually went and lost it as well. These last 4 candles, we've really been playing with this diagonal trend line. We have lost it, but again, in very recent times, it's been a bit of a support area. 320 is an area to look at. We'll see how we play out on the smaller time frames in a moment, see if there's any hope for us going there. Did forget to say, if you got any questions, obviously feel free to drop them into the chat box. I didn't get any questions ahead of time, so hopefully that means we can just focus on what it is we're going to talk about. Let's just jump into a little bit of news, and there's a lot of news articles, but I want to rattle through them quickly. So if there's any that you're interested in, let me know and I'll post them in Discord. This one, Simon actually spoke about it last week, but I thought it's kind of interesting in terms of narrative of where we are. We've seen institutions get involved with the ETFs. We've seen nation states getting involved with strategic crypto reserves. And now what we're actually seeing is they're after our Bitcoin as well. They're after, those that have held on Bitcoin for long enough that you may want to consider using some of that asset to put money down on a house. And I'm not going to necessarily go through the article, and again, I know that Sam talked about it, but for me, this is just a clear indication that there isn't enough Bitcoin for the market. So they're trying to use any ways they can to consider getting other Bitcoin off those that hold it and may have weaker hands than, say, institutions. And so it all sounds great. What a beautiful use for something like Bitcoin, to have that as a part payment of a house, or maybe even a full payment of a house. And maybe that will also help reinvigorate the US housing market, which, although high, has seen a drop in applications over recent year or so. But I stand by the sense of, I think Bitcoin is far too valuable, and this is going to go into what we talk about later on with alt seasons. And then actually, for me, I see Bitcoin as not something that I necessarily want to trade into altcoins or to use as a down payment for a house. I want to hold on to it because I see the longevity. I see these institutions coming in. I see the lack of supply out there when demand only increasing. I feel that over time, the value of Bitcoin is going to outweigh any value of a house. And just look at this. In 2017, it cost you 20. So this is US statistics, obviously. What you can see there is the average median value of a house in the United States, and then how many Bitcoin it would take to purchase it. 2017, 24 Bitcoin. The average price was around about 337,000. 2021, it had gone up by 70,000, 80,000 perhaps. But we had dropped to actually need 9 Bitcoin to purchase it. And then 4 years later, it's only gone up by 2,000, but we've halved the amount of Bitcoin that's required. It's 4 BTC. And this is the power of Bitcoin, really, isn't it? Is that is all, well, it certainly feels like the trend that we've seen is the amount of Bitcoin required to purchase is going to reduce over time, as that is just outstripping the value of property. So why would you want to necessarily give it away? I don't know the finer detail if they do it. Do you pay in Bitcoin? Do you get it? If you sell it, do you get that Bitcoin back? I highly doubt it. You'll probably just get the cash equivalent of whatever your house is worth at the time. And so for me, it's just that way of getting across more Bitcoin into the hands of those that don't deserve it. Because remember, they laughed at us, they mocked us, they restricted us for so long. And for those that did manage to hold on to some Bitcoin throughout that time, we should be able to hold on to it for as long as possible. And then this graph here, illustration, I suppose, just shows you so the typical house price and the value of it versus the value of Bitcoin. So you can kind of see just, fiat, just going to have to pay more and more, while in terms of if you using Bitcoin, you're paying less and less. And I see, people that I used to follow back in 2020, 2021, buying things like watches or Lamborghinis or any kind of fancy car with Bitcoin, and now they just think that's the most expensive payment they ever made. Because let's say you did buy a Lamborghini, $300,000 worth, when Bitcoin was at 30,000 back in 2000, whenever that was. It's 10 Bitcoin. Well, now it's only 3 Bitcoin, and that 10 Bitcoin's actually worth $1 million. Your Lamborghini ain't going to be worth that much. And so it's sort of people starting to cotton on to that, and actually stand by this, that it is a store of value. It is no longer an asset to be used to purchase things. That's just my opinion on that. And then we look on to the classic kind of articles that we get. Last week we were breaking back through, hitting that 108, 109,000. Things all looking good. And then suddenly within a week, a new specialist analyst comes along and says, actually, we're not going to get that vertical acceleration that we all thought we might. Instead, this actually might be a local top, or probably just an area of consolidation. And look, next week, the narrative might be completely different. I don't necessarily read these articles solely because of that. But I do agree with one thing in here, and that is the reality of it is its volume is very low at the moment. And without that massive surge of volume, it's going to be very hard to get those orders filled above and beyond all-time high. And so we are, again, probably going to need some form of news catalyst to drive that price forward. And that news catalyst will probably only drive the institutional side of it. I don't know what news event that's sort of bubbling on the horizon right now, whether it be the end to conflicts in the Middle East, the end to conflicts in Ukraine, resolution of the tariffs, or whatever, that's really going to make retail wake up and go, now's the time to go in on Fartcoin, or whatever it may be. And if we do look at volume, so this is just doesn't matter necessarily about the chart, we're looking at the bottom at the moment with the volume, you can kind of see just the volume right down here has just been incredibly low. Appreciate this is Binance US. I just picked the first chart that came across. We can see some green candles, some large green candles, sort of signifying days of some good moves, but generally we're much lower down than that. And it doesn't matter if it's green or it's red, they're kind of in a similar area. And for me, that is just suggesting that we haven't really got that excitement in and around where Bitcoin is. Now, don't get me wrong, institutions are still buying. We're seeing not just BlackRock, but Fidelity, Bitwise, ARK, all splashing the cash over the last couple of weeks and buying more Bitcoin. So that's not necessarily what is driving the price back down, although I would argue that these guys know what they're doing. They don't want to buy expensive Bitcoin. They'd rather wait for a sale to happen and try and buy it much lower. So yeah, we take that into account. We're not going to get down any rabbit holes or conspiracy theories about how BlackRock may, move price through false narratives, etc. But we have to accept that's probably going to happen. But they are still buying, and that buying is still not being reflected. Again, maybe if I had the Coinbase chart up here, these volumes might be larger because we know the ETFs are buying via Coinbase. But just as a principle, that's currently where that sits. And then, the other narrative that everyone's waiting for is the reduction in the FOMC, the federal rate. But good old Powell opened his mouth today, and he probably didn't appreciate what Donald Trump posted yesterday. So his stance, he's come out and said, look, down here, Chairman Powell, reiterating his wait-and-see stance amid the threat of tariffs. So everyone got a little bit excited, thinking maybe there's a smidgen of hope that we might actually see a rate drop in July. It's only, it's about 4 weeks away. I think it's 4 weeks tomorrow. But now we're, with him saying, it's wait and see, we need more data. What data do we really have? Yep, okay, we've got a CPI print that's in about 2 weeks' time. But other than that, it's just your standard sort of jobs data. And as I say, good old Donald Trump, calling him out yesterday, Jerome Too Late Powell and his tie board should be ashamed of themselves for allowing this to happen. You can see the quote there. But what we are seeing is that the Fed are not, getting nervous about Trump, having a go, having a rant on social media. They're sticking with their mandate. Do I believe that, them just waiting for the data constantly is the right thing to do? No, not necessarily. But unfortunately, that's the position that we find ourselves in. There's also a couple of other, before we get to that. So we did have the JOLTS job opens today, and they've come in actually higher. So it looks like there's more jobs being advertised than they thought. So again, that gives Powell that opportunity to just be like, well, look, not quite suggesting that the market has had that correction that we want. We're just going to wait to see what the next piece of information says. This week's all about unemployment, so we'll just wait for the dust to settle on that one. And don't forget, Friday, it's the 4th of July in America, so the markets are going to be closed. But we can see, it's still an 81% chance that the rate is going to remain the same. That's been fairly standard over the last week. Again, I pinch a salt until we get within 24 hours, but that's currently where we find ourselves. I did find it interesting in here that I wasn't really paying attention. I'm not on Truth Social, whatever it is. I don't always follow good old Trump's tweets or whatever they're called. But I did wonder why Tesla was getting an absolute hammering over the last couple of days. And it's because he's been ranting on again about EVs and about that Elon Musk is probably the most subsidized human on the planet, and he wants to take a look at them. And apparently he even starts to question the old South Africans' immigration status. So Tesla reacting to that, as you would imagine, you think Tuesday last week we were at sort of 360, now we're battling 300. Nice little gap there. I suggest that's probably going to get filled. They always do, seem to be. But yeah, for those of you that are confident enough, maybe an opportunity to buy, although some of you may be thinking some sort of double top forming there. Anyway, leave that one to yourself. And the reality, the biggest thing that comes from this article, though, is that threat of the tariffs. The tariffs have gone quiet, okay? We had to deal with Iran, didn't we? Which took up a couple of weeks. We had the fallout, obviously, with Elon as well. And let's not forget that big, beautiful bill that's trying to get through. I think it did just get through the Senate. I think it's got to go to the House of Representatives. But that is also something that Trump's been talking about. But the reality of it is the tariffs are about to come back and attack us pretty hard, because for the absolute vast majority of these tariffs, the deadline to extend them is the 9th of July. So that's a week tomorrow. So I think the narrative over the next 6 days or so is going to be very much about whether or not we get any deals. And I appreciate vast majority of these are minor countries, but there's a lot of them. And the EU is also a 9th of July deadline as well. So that's a pretty big one. I can't remember where China and Canada are, but they're not on the same day. However, I think that's going to be where the narrative in the discussion is. And if we don't get the right wording from that, given we are in a news-driven analysis market at the moment, I could really take the price back down. So certainly something to have a look at there. What's this? It's just another one on tariffs. I don't know why I've got this one up over anything else. So we'll just move on from that one. We'll talk more about tariffs next week. I think, it should be on the eve of it unless we've actually had an announcement. So we can focus on that then. And then something that did actually catch me. When we were talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, I was following this thing like every 6 hours. And then I seem to have been completely taken by surprise because apparently tomorrow we are actually going to get a Solana ETF approval, which has got people excited, thinking, well, there we go. We'll get the first Solana ETF approval. Then we might get some of these basket ETFs, which hold multiple altcoins within them. And then could we even get some sort of comment on the staking side of things? So be interesting to see actually what is mentioned tomorrow. And if this one, I can't remember which one this one is. I don't think it's got its name on here. I'll have to try and dig it out afterwards. Just quickly checking. Oh, yeah, I think it's this one. Sorry, Rex Osprey Solana Staking ETF. It's officially set to launch on Wednesday, becoming the first US to allow crypto staking. Okay, so we might get some. So we could suggest that actually maybe we do start to see a bit of an altcoin rally. Now, I'm going to temper any excitement that you have with that because we know how well Ethereum did with their ETF launch straight afterwards. It didn't really do too much. Whether there's an appetite for some of these other ones and the volatility that comes with them, I'm going to be happy to just wait and see. But yeah, not getting necessarily too excited about that. And then people were also getting excited last night about the SEC acknowledging an amendment to convert Grayscale's digital large cap fund, so one of these basket ones, into an ETF covering. But it wasn't an approval. It was just like, okay, right, you've made an amendment there. I'm not getting too carried away necessarily with that. And then I'll put it on the big screen here because we used to do this. We used to follow these all the time when the next approval were, final deadlines and everything else. So we've got the basket one, which the final deadline apparently is tomorrow. No, that must have passed. Oh, no, the 2nd of the 7th. Yeah, sorry, it's because it's the American way of looking at it. And then we've got Litecoin, Solana. But they've given some sort of odds of approval with this. And I'm surprised that actually some of these are so high. Avalanche, HBAR, Polkadot, Cardano, all within the 9%. Dogecoin, 90%. And these ones at 95. I think, we get Solana, probably Litecoin and XRP going to follow pretty quickly afterwards. Some of the other ones, hey, we'll wait and see. Interestingly, no Trump coin ETF looking for that approval. But yeah, if that's something that you want to follow and try and give yourself a little bit of hope from it, then hey, maybe this might help a bit of a summer alt season. We'll have to wait and see. And then one other bit of news just kind of caught my eye this week. Obviously, MicroStrategy seemed to make, or strategy, keep on going, remember, got to call them strategy, made another announcement to say that they are buying more, or they have bought more Bitcoin, nearly 5,000 of them, and they have 597,000 Bitcoin at the moment, which is pretty incredible. However, what is interesting is it was the end of a quarter yesterday. And so, in theory, MicroStrategy have ticked off what is one of the last remaining hurdles, or jumped the last remaining hurdle for them potentially to be listed on the S&P 500. Now, that would be an incredible tick in the box and, a further cementing of legitimacy of Bitcoin. I'm not going to say cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin, given, MicroStrategy's complete U-turn over the last 5 years in terms of what they now do and where they're going and the resistance that they have necessarily had. I think they've had a couple of occasions where they've tried to get listed on the S&P, but it hasn't necessarily gone their way. I want to scroll down, can't remember which article it's in. This one here. So just very quickly, how to qualify for the S&P, because there is a criteria to it. First and foremost, you've got to be a US-based company with a market capitalization of at least 14.5 billion. I think they're like nearly 10 times that much. So I don't think that was necessarily a problem. Listed on either the NYSE, NASDAQ, or the CBOE. The company must also have positive earnings in their most recent quarter, which they've had, and the sum of its trailing 4 consecutive orders. That was the one they were waiting to get the tick from, and so they have finally got that. Additionally, at least 50% of the company's stock must be available to the public with adequate trading volume and liquidity, and we know MicroStrategy gets traded. So in theory, they've ticked all the boxes. However, you can do all of that and still not get in, because there's a committee that effectively ultimately decides on whether or not you are good enough to be listed on the S&P. They put it down to make sure that there's some sort of balance of sectors and making sure that you aren't just a flash in the pan, and this is going to be good for investor sentiment. So we may not get that approval, but technically they have actually, for the first time ever, made all of those things. And I think good old Jeff Walton here talks about it. So they are the 93rd largest company by market cap. So over that 14 billion, they've got 114 nearly billion. Quarter 2 closed, Bitcoin at 107, resulting in a Q2 2025 EPS of 39.5. Clearing the final criteria, strategy needed to be considered for the S&P 500, as will their report positive earnings of 11 billion, resulting in positive earnings when summed together of the last 4 quarters. So then it just goes on to say that actually we're now looking for whether or not the committee are gonna actually accept them. And so that's something I think is worth watching. And whilst we're in that news-driven sector, not necessarily because let's all invest in MicroStrategy right now because this could be amazing. I mean more just for that next step of legitimacy. It's a very good accolade to have, to be listed on there. You could argue there's plenty of companies on there that aren't performing very well, but whatever the reason is, doesn't necessarily matter. If they decide to allow MicroStrategy on there, knowing what their company is now all about, it is a resounding yes to Bitcoin. So yeah, we shall have to wait and see. Bobby's put, also being part of the S&P 500 means the vast majority of people with a pension that has passive index tracker will be able to invest in crypto indirectly. I agree, yes. So, for me, we've seen the ETFs, but if, or should I say when, these massive institutions are allowed to start putting pension funds into ETFs and Bitcoin and stuff like that, whether it be third party via another company such as mining companies or strategy or anything else, but more so just directly, I think that is when we're going to start to see a massive inflow of funds. But again, that might just solely be linked to Bitcoin there. Anyhow, but in classic kind of bait and switch, MicroStrategy's price has actually dropped today. It's down nearly 7%. So who cares about Q2 earnings? Who cares about actually the rumor that you may get onto the S&P 500? Or you could just argue that there's some sort of local top and channel that they're just coming back down from. We'll have to just wait and see on that one. But yeah. Okay, let's just quickly cover some small Bitcoin stuff. Then we'll go into talking about, is Bitcoin running out of time, specifically 4-year cycle. And when I say Bitcoin, I actually mean cryptocurrency. But let's just have a quick look at where we're at. It's a new month, so we've kind of just refreshed everything. And so I drew all this a couple of hours ago. So these yellow boxes are the new liquidation levels. And interestingly, some orders had actually been removed, and we actually saw what was a start of a build up around 100,000. Now, definitely cemented itself at that 98 level. So sort of maybe investor got spooked and looking at this wick as a line of protection. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But what is interesting is these two liquidity levels here, and there is a defined gap. There is a blatant gap between 104 and 105. So that's why I didn't draw it as one large box there. But interestingly, since I've drawn it, we've already started to eat into this. News of the day, everything else is just drawing ourselves back down. For me, I have reason to believe that we're going to go through this and also down to at least taking that 102,700 level. And if I was a better man, I'll show you later, a retest of that 100,000 is probably on the cards, if not slightly lower, although that might be a wick back down within it. But other than that, we're just continuing to range. And we've been in this range for the last 7 weeks. Actually, we've probably been in this range for the last 8 weeks, really. Pretty much everything you can see on this chart, the 12-hour candles right now. The mean of it is probably about 105, which roughly where we're sitting at the moment. We've had some ups, we've had some downs, but it's just an element of just generally indecision and lack of movement there. I think there's too many uncertainties going around in the news cycle that's just not really getting people ready to commit, which is kind of ironic because Bitcoin's doing this, whereas S&P posting all-time highs, NASDAQ recently posting all-time highs, although it has pulled back again today. Gold looking like it's consolidating quite nicely in and around all-time highs, although actually is looking a bit Bitcoin-esque there. So there seems to be some sort of disconnect between Bitcoin and some of the more traditional markets. But take that with a pinch of salt, because okay, NASDAQ and S&P have just posted new all-time highs a couple of days ago. 5 weeks ago, Bitcoin posted an all-time high of 112. So it's still pretty close. It's not like Bitcoin's in a terminal decline. But when you just look at it on this thing, we're ranging. I think that's the point I'm just trying to make there. June and July, a bit of interesting months. They're kind of 50-50 whether it's up or it's down. So there's not much really to go from there. We did finish it positive, although only just. July's a day out, so let's not even consider that. Last 5 years for July, it's not actually been too bad. And there's an article, I must have got rid of it. I must have done, which was talking about the S&P since 2015 has always had a green July. I'll find it later. And so could that be a good thing for Bitcoin? So for the last 11 years or 10 years, Bitcoin's S&P has always posted a green July. And if Bitcoin is still getting that correlation, maybe we've got that green one there. I think really when I look at this, all that I'm worried about at the moment is August and September. Notoriously bad months for Bitcoin, and they're still ahead of us. So yeah, something to bear in mind there. Right, well, let's just see if I put this one. So I've been harking on. We've got Bitcoin on the 12-hour again. And I mentioned this on Friday, and thank you for those that actually did decide to tune in on Friday. Hopefully it was slightly helpful. But that, it's the simplest form of charting you can do, but you cannot deny it. There is a definitive line of resistance there at the moment. We've ran into it, smashed into it, and since then we've pulled back down. And I can't unsee that, to be honest. And then if you add, again, this might not be the cleanest, and you can argue how you're positioning these. And fine, we can have that debate. But I'm kind of thinking body to body. Doesn't quite work there, but it's good as can be. This looks like some sort of channel, and we talk about maybe it is a bull flag, and that's absolutely fine. But what I'm seeing at the moment is a rejection from there, and that's it. We're looking at shorter time frames at the moment. That's the rejection we've got to be talking about. Is there anything we can do to capitalize on that, or any levels to have a look at? And we'll go on the lower time frame a little bit later on, so have a look at vectors and EMAs and all that kind of stuff. But big picture looking at the moment, every time we fit there, come back here, back up there, come back here, back up there. I mean, if you had a gun to your head and they're going, what's Bitcoin's next move? What's the level it's going to go to? You're probably going to go, I'd prefer my hedge bet down there. Don't know when, don't know how far. Maybe it doesn't quite go that far. Maybe it doesn't close on the line. It just wicks to it, whatever. But that's kind of where I would, be looking. And so when I talk about that retrace that 100K, this is where I'm seeing. And we talked. There's certainly precedent for it coming down to that sort of 102 level, and it picks up enough steam, and maybe they're just saying, actually, I'm going to take this down here. So that's kind of a very big picture look at it. We'll go in more detail a little bit later on. Have a quick drink because I'm thirsty as well. Right, let's have a look at what else I was going to talk about, which was this. Okay, 4-year cycle. Getting on to what the clickbaity kind of title was, is time up for Bitcoin's 4-year cycle. We've talked about this last couple of weeks. And why do I keep on going on about it? It's because we're at the death rattle of what has been historically a very good indication of Bitcoin's movements. And we've got 6 months to go, potentially less, 5-6 months to go. And Bitcoin's kind of stuck there. But when I personally think when we talk about the Bitcoin cycle, 4-year cycle, we're not talking about 4-year cycle for Bitcoin. We're talking about altcoins, because vast majority of the time we've been in crypto, that's what we're in. Most people on this call now, most people in the community are not in Bitcoin. Or if they are, it's only a slight allocation in Bitcoin, and we're in altcoins. And so you look at this chart, we're in the green. The green is supposed to be a transfer from it's supposed to be the transfer is complete, and it's where altcoins fly. And we can visually see this by just overlaying. Hopefully you can see it anyway. Let's get rid of that for now. Try and make it a little bit bigger. So the red squiggly line is Bitcoin dominance. Apologies if it's not that clear, but I'll talk you through it. Obviously, we're looking for drops. Drops in the red squiggly line means that Bitcoin dominance is dropping, and that's dropping because alts are picking up. And we can see 2017, big cascading waterfall off, and that was in the green year. Bitcoin still climbed, but alts were climbing faster. We get to 2021, big drop off in altcoins. Bitcoin again still climbed, but altcoins must have been climbing faster because dominance was dropping away. So I got an itchy nose. But what's happened this cycle, and we've pointed this out so many times, is we haven't had that drop off yet. Matter of fact, Bitcoin, all it's done is climb, climb, climb. And that's not necessarily means that, the 4-year cycle is broken, but what it does mean is it's going to have to move pretty darn quick to sort of prove that that's where it's going. And we'll have a look a little bit later on. Big moves still happen in the latter parts of this year, not as in 2025, but year in the 4-year cycle. But we would have normally have seen this by now. We can kind of have a look at this a little bit clearer on this chart. So what we've got at the moment, just focus on the yellow lines. We'll talk about the blue lines in a moment. Yellow lines are just where the halving happens. And I could have gone back to the other halving as well, but this one just fits on the screen a little bit better, but it still works. What we've sort of said in the past, why the 4-year cycle seems to be so clean is, 530 days from the halving is when we're kind of seeing the top for Bitcoin. It happened in 2017, or I suppose you want to call it 2016 halving, happened in the 2020 halving. And so the point is, that kind of gives us this ballpark figure. Now, everyone's been talking about 1st of December, but actually, even if we went on the longest time scale of 546 days, it's actually mid-October. And you've got to remember, it is coming forward ever so slightly. So it was the 11th of December or the 17th of December in 2017. It was the 8th of November in 2021. So actually, it probably is going to be sometime in October. And when we look at the 4-year cycle, it is not exactly 52 weeks a year. It's like 50 weeks a year. So over the 4 years, that 4 to 8 weeks is kind of where that falls apart. But, what does that mean for us? It kind of means that where are we now? Let me just draw it from halving. How many weeks into this have we been? We are 63 weeks in. So we've got 15 weeks in which we need to see that move happen if we're going to stick with the 4-year cycle narrative. Let's just be optimistic and say 20 weeks in case we slip to the beginning of December, the other side, and still call within it. Now, you could go, okay, well, that's fine, Harry, but how about from market bottoms? And I appreciate you can't see the market bottom in 2015, but I'll move it this way. Market bottom represented by this blue line. From market bottom to market top, it's 152 weeks or 1,064 days. 3 years, just under 3 years. And that makes sense because it's a 4-year cycle, 3 years up, 1 year down. And then 2018 into the all-time high in 2021 was another 52 weeks, 164 days. Obviously, I'm on the weekly time frame. It's not exactly 164 days. It's just represented by the number of candles. And so we look at it from, okay, well, where's the market bottom? The market bottom was there. You go 152 weeks from there. It's the exact same week. Actually, sorry, it's not. It's 1 week away. Apologies. Now I was getting all excited. 13th and then, 6th. So it's 1 week difference from it. It's actually bringing it even closer to the left-hand side. So if we go by the 4 years cycle, then we're suggesting that actually we got 15 to 20 weeks left. That is all we've got. But you can see even in the Bitcoin chart, you can see the moves, and they're fairly strong moves that sort of work their way through. But I just want to sort of have a look at what it looks like the last 15 weeks, so that you don't get too. There is some good moves, there really is. I mean, in that last 15 weeks, it's just on Bitcoin. We'll have a look at other ones a bit later on. There was a 500% move in this last 15 weeks. When does that happen? Not going to be quite as good, I'm afraid. But it was 130% move. And so you could argue, okay, well, we could either be optimistic and say we're going to get a 525% move, which I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to get to 673,000 this cycle. Sorry if that bursts your bubble there. Or we could say we're going to get 128% move from here. And that's still, from this position, 250,000. I think even that might be slightly too high. So given that the 4-year cycle is for Bitcoin, but we as retail normally want to see how things play out for altcoins, it's probably better to have a look at how these figures all work against the altcoin market. And we can do exactly the same. Again, the figures, that they are genuine. I haven't just taken them from the previous chart. It's whatever it happens to be. And it just so happens that it's very similar. So on Bitcoin, it was 78, 75. So mean average of 76 weeks, I suppose. Total 2, from the halving to the top of the altcoin market, it's 78. It's exactly the same time. A lot of people think that the altcoin halving happens, so the altcoin top happens after the Bitcoin, after the Bitcoin top, not the Bitcoin is in its asset. And that may well be for some altcoins, but for the overall market cap, it seems to peak at exactly the same week. So in terms of timeframes, looks like we're talking about the same thing. But here's the difference is, and again, we're looking at, well, let's just put it on the linear chart. Maybe we get a real feel for how this looks. We take those last 15 weeks now, you're going to get a real flavor for just how much movement there is. I'm going to try and position this correctly. Okay. So in 2017, that last 15 weeks, I'm trying to provide a bit of hope here, did give us an 850% rise in altcoins. Okay. Pretty wild. How was that compared to 2021? Well, the peak happened there. So let's just line that bad boy up. Then let's get our measuring, this one here, it'll be. Okay. It's 110%. Now, again, I could overlay those figures to where we currently sit at the moment, but I think the reality of it is, if I put an 851% increase on here, I mean, I'll do it. That's only 200 there. I have to go back to the logarithmic. That's going to take the market cap to 10 trillion. That's outside of Bitcoin as well. It's 10 trillion just on altcoins. Well, I'm probably not going to happen. Amazing if it did, but probably not going to happen. We take 110. Oh, that is 110. Okay. That was easy. And it's going to be, about 2.4 trillion, 2.5 trillion. Bitcoin probably be more, in terms, so we may be looking at sort of a $6 trillion market cap. Or what we could do is go, let's not think about it in terms of percentage increase. In that 15 weeks, how much money was actually, dumped into the market? And maybe that's a better way of looking at it, because this is 874 billion was added. So that would take us to the 2 trillion mark, which would be, so this is maybe a pessimistic view on it. 75% increase in terms of where the market is at the moment. And this was only a 400. So that's going to take us pretty much back to the all-time high. And I know they may not be figures that we necessarily want to hear. 37% increase from where we're currently sitting at the moment. But, you know, maybe that's something else that we necessarily need to have a look at in terms of where the market could be going from a price point of view. But let's take it back to the percentage side of things. The markets can move strong if we get that ignition point, whatever that ignition point needs to be. Retail FOMO in 2017, in my opinion, was greater than retail FOMO in 2021. I think 2021, I mean, I've said my piece on that second peak, but we also had the introduction of DeFi and lending and all these protocols that suddenly allowed the degens that were already in it to try and amplify their returns. Where in 2017, it really was FOMO. FOMO because there were bottlenecks in getting in and things were moving incredibly fast and there just wasn't that much choice to go with. So I feel like that was where that sat. Now, I've kind of done a similar sort of thing for, you know, things like Ethereum, and I'm not going to draw it out here at the moment. But again, you know, I'll take it off the logarithmic for you just so you can see. But look at Ethereum, look at the moves, and then look at this move. It's just not there at the moment. Something's holding it back. Bitcoin dominance, again, we talked about it, but, you know, from the halving, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months, then it fell away. 8 months, 9 months, fell away. From this halving, yeah, it had a little fall away 7 months in, but it recovered it. And we're now, you know, a year and a bit in, and we've not had that fall away at the moment. So something's not quite necessarily working there. You look at anything versus BTC, again, which gives you, I mean, it's the inverse of what I was showing effectively. But again, we're not seeing those sharp spikes up for Ethereum, which shows that Ethereum is getting overvalued better than Bitcoin is. And that is a cause for concern. Of course it is. But I do stand by the fact that these sharp moves, initial moves, they happen very suddenly. So if we can get that spark, and I don't know what that spark's going to be, you know, things can rapidly change. But until that changes, that's why my stance is a little bit different on where we sit in terms of altcoins. And you know, nothing paints a worse picture for altcoin position at the moment than the others. So this is outside of the top 10, and this is dominance. And we've seen again, you know, 6 to 8 months after halving, we have that sharp move up. You know, we're over a year. We've not had that sharp move up. And alts are really struggling. And we're getting to a point at the moment where, you know, others' dominance is at, you know, an unbelievable low. We have to actually go back to the last cycle, you know, to 2021, when Bitcoin made that massive move through December 2020 before it happens. And I do think, I drew this on Friday, I do think that's probably the level we're going to have to, you know, maybe try and wait for that next bounce from. But we are just continuing down now. You know, again, I get it that, you know, Bitcoin dominance it's not up forever. And sorry, there's definitely some pinch point here. I completely get it. But this apex has filled. You know, you could argue that we're moving it now because previously we were drawing it here and now we just busted out the bottom of it. So, yeah, there's something to be said about just there isn't that imagination in and around where Bitcoin is. And I think the worst one to look at has to be others versus BTC in terms of that there. And then I come across articles like this, and I get the point it's trying to make in this article, but I categorically didn't agree with the clickbait title, perhaps. The greatest transfer of wealth from Bitcoin to altcoins has begun. This is yesterday's article. Doesn't feel like that's where it's begun to me. And it's basically just saying that, look, we're at the weakest altcoins have been for 4 years. So this is probably an ideal time to move in. And I would categorically say that is the wrong mentality to have right now. I would wait for that move, because if altcoins are going to take over, trust me, there is plenty of room to run. And so just because we're at that periodic low, and the tweet actually did show it, but effectively a 90-day rolling period, only 8% of altcoins excluding stable coins, have actually outperformed Bitcoin, which that is the lowest level in the past 2 years. And it says here one of the weakest since 2019. There was a time in 2021, as I mentioned. So the idea between that shift of wealth with thought process is it's at a low, it's got to turn around soon, let's do it. But I stand by what this next part says, and I do believe it's too many tokens, not enough buyers. The amount that I've talked about this so many times, the amount of tokens that have just opened up have just meant that there's too much choice for people. And I remember starting this cycle, and I would say to people, look, last cycle I was in 80 tokens. Didn't really work out the way I wanted to. I was going to restrict it down to 15. I'm like down to 4 at the moment. And I do feel, and maybe there's some parallels here with those of you who are involved in subnets, but you got to understand, the more altcoins you're in, the closer to the mean, the average of altcoin performance you're going to be, because you're spreading yourselves across. And so at times when altcoins are not performing against BTC, it doesn't stand right to just be in a whole hold of altcoins. And you can draw any parallels you want with where that sits with subnets and how many subnets you may find yourselves in at the moment. But just bear in mind, the more you are in an environment and an ecosystem, the closer to the average performance you're going to get. Of course, there are always outliers, and maybe you do hit 100x. But we ain't seeing many 100x's at the moment in altcoins. And so you've really got to be narrative based, and we're AI based, so that's there, but it's still not hitting at the moment with where we're going. And I'm positioning myself to just be able to move from that, and that's how I will. I'll always sort of want to act, and I'll adapt as it comes. CoinGlass sort of representing alt season, absolutely down here. The index at the moment is at 22, so we're in Bitcoin season at the moment. That last move up was the Trump pump after the election victory. And ever since then, it's been a steady drop back down. That's reflected in the charts. Most of you tracking your portfolios of altcoins will have seen December was the peak. And it's just been falling, bleeding away since then. And here we go, Bitcoin. Total 2 versus Bitcoin. This is everything but Bitcoin against it. We can see the lows here. I'm sorry, but I cannot unsee this level here. Okay, maybe a little bit lower, but that region down here at 42, I feel that's probably where we're going to go. How quickly we get there, who knows? Maybe it is going to take another couple of months, and then we are only going to be left with 2, 3, 4 months after that to make that move, assuming the 4-year cycle is correct. I don't necessarily want to get down to the whole, I'll quickly mention, you've got to remember that for alt seasons previously, people have been willing to part with their Bitcoin at a stage to then go into altcoins. And I don't necessarily see that that's there. And I touched on the fact that we haven't had that real retail coming in at the moment. Not something we often look at, but you go onto Google Trends, Bitcoin, 16, relative lows, new all-time highs, only around the corner, still at 16. I've gone back to 2004, of course, Bitcoin wasn't there then. But altcoins, similarly, 17, Ethereum, 10, I think that was, yep. Coinbase, 16, and that is still with, Coinbase as a stock as well as Coinbase as an exchange. BitTensor's actually done all right. The data's really only from the last 2 years, mind, or year and a half, but it's at 50 at the moment, but still on a decline. Subnets, I knew people might ask, not applicable. The word's been used for ages, so it's really hard to see how subnets are working. But, you can see previous cycles, this was much higher. Big events that have happened, much higher. Even March 24, meme coin season, moved everything up. November, the Trump rally, we had those, but lack of interest at the moment. And without retail, I stand by the fact, I don't think we're going to get a full-blown alt season until they arrive. So maybe we are running out of time. And that doesn't mean that I'm bearish, because all it means is if we get to December and we haven't seen that move yet, do we have to then just discount the 4-year cycle? I'm not willing to discount the 4-year cycle yet. I think it's, until it's actually broken, we follow it. But I'm just cautious at the moment of where that goes. And that is why on charts, I still have a look at this. people might think it's mad to be like, Harry, why do you bother with the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame? But in bull markets, that is our support crutch. And if we break it and lose it, then I'm going to have to start questioning things. And I'm not saying we are now. Don't misconstrue what I've just commented on there. But this is on the chance for me just to monitor and see where things are moving along. I don't have it with me, but we had drawn that chart previously, which kind of intersected where some of these things are. But let's just say, between October and December is sort of beginning, middle of November. And this is perhaps what we've got to work with. So, we might see some move up here. Of course, that's kind of the line. I'd argue let's just be safe and move it to here, end of December. We get to the end of December and we haven't seen that decisive move. Things are still going up or what have you, or we've massively broken down way before then, and we've crossed the close below the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame. Then we can start talking about whether or not the 4-year cycle isn't working for us anymore. But for me, that's kind of where I'm looking. Oops. So that kind of block there, we need it to stick the landing in between those two levels. Okay, let's leave that there. And let's get on to some other forms of charting, shall we? So some of these may follow on from Friday, although I think I'm on a different set of charts, so maybe not. I'm just going to get rid of these. I don't think they're necessarily there. We know, so drew it, there's that line there. I should just say, I appreciate I've just rattled on for 20 minutes on the 40 seconds. I'm more than happy to have that debate or conversation if anyone thinks differently within that. I don't think I've outright said that it's over for them. I just, I think we just now need to, just enter things with a bit of caution. Things haven't moved as they had in the past. So we can't solely just nail our hearts to the mast, wear our hearts on the sleeves, whatever the phrase is, and believe that it's going to play out. I appreciate every time it's ever so slightly different, but we're seeing some quite, varied differences at the moment. And so we should just be cautiously optimistic instead of blindly optimistic. Right, Bitcoin. Again, we've seen that rejection. Now let's have a look at it from the EMA point of view. And we've lost the 10 and the 20, which, because we've been ranging, that's not necessarily a problem. The 50 has kind of held us up. So that's around at 104. What was 104? That was that bottom of that first liquidity level we were talking about down top of that one, down here. So we could certainly see that move back down to that level, taking out that. We've got that green vector candle, which I still think is a big tempting target. I've talked so many times about vector candles being recovered all the time whilst we're ranging. I think that's probably going to be an area to have a look at. And that's why I'm getting that 100K from. In terms of going on to sort of the lower time frames there, thank you, we've finally lost the 50 as well. But what we have caught ourselves on is the 200 EMA. It hasn't really been that much of a support for us, but we've certainly had a lot of price interactions in and around it. Through the middle of June, we had, I thought I had quite a lot of time in and around there. So we're coming back down, but right now I still see, that block to be taken out and that block, and that effectively on the 4 hour, those two there are what we saw with the green candle on the daily. So on the 4 hour, they're even more aggressively recovered. So again, that's where I'm looking. And I dare say that, if we were to, we'd probably actually look to, that would be the potential low there, that wick on the 4 hour, obviously taking up a little bit more on the daily time frame then. From an EMA point of view, let's get rid of these. I'm just getting rid of some stuff because it's going to look very messy in a moment. All those lines flying in. We can do, the level that we're ranging in. So from the top down to the bottom. And I tell you, that rejection's looking pretty nice at 786. We lost the 681. We wicked, bounced, wicked, held it, lost it earlier on today. And we're kind of close to the 105. The 382 is at the bottom of this blue vector candle, and the 236 is at the bottom of the green vector candle. I think they're levels that we might likely see. You could argue there's a potential double top. Let's get rid of this now. In and around here, which may be leading to that there. Where you put the neckline is probably that. Ugh, that's a horrible neckline. It's not a straight line, neither is that. You get the point. But yeah, something to just to have a look at. I think the vector candle areas are probably just, such confluence there with the fibs. And then have a look, the 800 EMA at the bottom on the 4-hour, just creeping up to where the previous spike down was. And if this descending channel plays out fully, then that's going to kind of run smack back into that kind of region. So another target to potentially have a look at there. I won't bother with the 4-hour. I'm conscious of where the time's at. Let's have a look at Tau, start on the daily. And I mean, this is just looking like a mini version of what happened from December down. And that's the sad truth, unfortunately, about it at the moment. So this was what Friday we were talking about, that move up. We talked about the 10, the 20 EMA, and it's just cleanly come back down to it at the moment. I do sort of accept that there's a potential support line just at 320. A lot of movement locally, bit of action here, bit of action back in March and February. And then when you look across here, 320 it's an all right level. So could turn here, but we can't hold it. Then it's 300. It has to be the reclaiming of this vector zone, which ties in with the 800 EMA. I mean, there's no cleaner way of looking at it. But unlike Bitcoin, which on the daily, the other EMAs were kind of interlocking with each other, these are all fanning out in the way that we don't want them to. So, we've got the 10, the 20, the 50, and the 200 all above us, all in the right order above us. The 800's too new. It's only a few weeks old, so that's not going to be anywhere close. So yeah, that's concerning because it just means the route of travel. And also on the way down, we don't really have any vectors now. We've closed them all out. So we've got no vectors above us on the daily, just this one down here. And, if this doesn't hold, wow. It was such a strong move out of the early April terrorist kind of crash that, fast moves can happen. And as easy as it was for us to believe and accept that strong move up, and we were just happy because our portfolios are going that way, we find it difficult to think that a rapid move down could happen as well, because it means our portfolios are blowing up. So that's something to consider. I'm still not back in. 50% out of Tau at the moment, 50% out of most of my altcoins as well, which is where we are. Dropping onto the 4-hour. And look, there's no pretty line here, but there is some sort of descending curved channel. I know it's got a curve to it, but there is, we're just lower highs, lower lows, just nicely down as we're going, and we're just forming them here. We do have some vectors up here for a bit of an attack vector later on, but I still think right now we're too close to this one for us not to consider it. And when we get on the 4-hour, we've really got to think about those moves there. Now, in terms of where we see things, I'm not sure where's the best to draw this. Let's go from whatever the highest close was. Well, they're both the same, so let's just do it from here to there. So there's this one. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it all a bit better now. But no, I'm not, because I've moved it. I mean, there's definitely 6185, 382. We've got some action in and around here. Okay, but what we've drawn, probably a fairly decent one, and we're now just losing that last level. And there's potentially moving down there. Could be an M, a double top rather than an M formation, because we're already in the descent. We wouldn't think we'd get an M formation there in how things are playing out, but we could get down to this. And we go back to that daily, just trying to provide a bit of hope. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when this first move happened, is, we had some sort of topping pattern here. We've had the moves down. Okay, we may get one more, but we thought that actually it was M, that was 1, that was 2. This is part of the 3. Okay, so this section here I'm looking at now. And so really we're just looking for that second move down so that we can form that W. And this next bit, wherever it ends up, could be that W to come back through. So natural that we would look to try and get that. Now on the 4-hour, we need it to go a bit lower than this, but there could be some sort of double bottom potentially forming wherever this finds itself. And we want it to finish higher than 290. We don't want it to go any lower, otherwise we're going to have to question whether or not it's there. But that's something to unfortunately have to consider within that. I mean, near not looking great, which is why I've sold. Link's not looking great. Again, we're a bit further along than bit tensor in terms of, sorry, a bit further behind. We've got this double top here. We're on the neckline thereabouts, but it looks like we're losing it. And this has just got, you know, big candles up. I'm amazed that this one isn't a vector candle. I wonder if we go on the 4 hour time frame, on the lower time frames, if it is. I'm not going to do too much TA. This is just me being curious now. I'll draw this here. So I'm going to do that. I know which one I'm looking at. Yeah, there we go, vector candle there. It looked like it was just too strong otherwise. It's surrounded by vector candles. Fair enough. Right, moving on from that one. Under, I mean, it's right down on this bottom. It needs to hold this. If it doesn't hold this under, I think I want the 1 hour there, sorry. I mean, it's just eating into these vectors at the moment. Still, it can potentially hold this, but I think there's just too much momentum down there. We start to get some negative sentiment. I think that's where it's going. SPX falling hard. And this is an interesting one, SPX, because we've seen double top patterns form before, and then it just rallies out, and we've got another double top pattern. I think it's going back to 90 to $1, let's just call it. But this was one that does actually move quite nicely. So I think I might reallocate some of my cash, you know, back in to try and ride a little bit of a pump on this one. One that was pointed out to me is Hype. It's a hyperliquid. This kind of passed me by, but I mean, SPX has looked pretty good from the March, April lows, but Hype has done really well. You know, 4x, and it's moving down here fine. Could be a could actually be a Head and Shoulders, maybe neckline there. But just given this move, I think a move down to sort of 34. That's the battleground there. We don't hold that. Head and Shoulders is complete. And then we've got these vectors here to potentially have a tackle. But it was Steve that pointed it out. I'm just going to track it just because I'm interested. I'm not involved in it. But it is one that's definitely performed well in recent times there. I don't think there's really anything else I want to necessarily run through. Just having a look. Dollar's still falling. I don't know when I drew that, but it's kicked off that one. Quite nice. What is that I've drawn? Okay, the bottom of that channel. Right, so it's right on the bottom of that channel. God, I haven't looked at that in a while. Interesting to see what it does there, but okay. Well, why is that looking so funny? I don't know. And we've kind of gone through quite a lot of these. VIX is getting slightly low again. We've done NASDAQ and all of those. Okay, I think that's probably it. Urjan's put, maybe this cycle is where it moves towards a 6-year liquidity chart that Sam uses. Is it 6 years or 7? I can't remember. But yeah, could be a shout there. Maybe it's time to get stretched to 5. I'm gonna watch it till it breaks, but I'm still of the opinion that, well, yeah, whether it's a liquidity cycle or just a global cycle that's going to shake the institutions and the ETFs, then I think we're going to see some buoyancy. I think dips, even sharp drops, will be aggressively bought up by those that can, that are trying to get it through mortgages or whatever. But right, let's just knock it on the head there. Thank you very much, everybody. Trading Pub on Tuesday. I'll do another trading charting one, solely charting one, on Friday. It'll probably be a similar time, sort of 1:45. Again, you don't necessarily need to watch it live. I'm just going to film it live and just dump the link in Discord. I won't tag anyone. I won't tag everyone. You just know on a Friday, just look there, there'll be one. But we're trying to go in a bit lower time frames and a bit more in depth for bits. I don't know why there's a bit of a halo at the bottom of myself there, and I'm looking a bit shiny headed. Anyway, I'll cut all that out of the video. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Let's just see how things are moving. Watch out for tariffs. We might get announcements between now and next Wednesday, which could really shake things up, particularly the EU. I think that's the big one to look for. No one really cares what's going on in some, well, smaller country. I was going to be abusive, but, you know, I don't want to take any smaller countries down. Right. Enjoy your evenings. I'll speak to you all soon, guys. Cheers now.